So let's get a few of the technical issues sorted. Perfect. Good. Hello and welcome to today's Crossing Borders, the IMC streaming service created to keep investment migrations professionals connected and informed on all matters relating to the investment migration world. Before we start, I just want to remind you that if you haven't seen one of these broadcasts, you can catch up through our YouTube channel, and I ask you to give us a rating, and don't forget to hit like, share and subscribe for updates. I'm Bruno Lecuyer, the Chief Executive of the IMC. In today's broadcast, as ever, you can ask questions using the widget on the right of your screen, where you will also find some useful handouts regarding today's discussion. In this streaming session, we will be discussing with Dan Lundy, partner at Klasko Immigration Law Partners, and Rupy Cheema, who's the CEO of EB5 Diligence based in Toronto. So what we're discussing is, does the EB5 program make more sense than ever for families seeking permanent US residency? Just have to mention that Dan Lundy isn't on the line as yet. He's having some issues getting into the webinar. As soon as he does, though, we will let you know. To keep you engaged, as ever, we have a little bit of polling. So we're going to be testing this out right now. And we're simply asking you, where are you from today? Or where are you watching us from today? So we'll give you 5 seconds to choose your answer. Okay, I can see that well over 80% of you have answered. So I'm going to be publishing the results. And for my guest, you can see that 60% are watching us from Europe and Africa, and 40% are watching us from the Americas, which is always good to know where people are at this particular moment in time. So there's also a short video at the end of today's program about how you can get qualified through this certification in investment migration. So do stay with us. So a very warm welcome, Rupy. I know it's still fairly early in Toronto, but I want to kick in straight away. And the objective of this webinar is to understand a little bit more about the EB5 program. And in your opinion, does the program make more sense than ever for families looking and seeking permanent residency in the United States?
Yes, can you hear me, Dan? Because I can't see you anymore. I just want to make sure that.
So here we are. You should be able to see
me. Threw me off. Okay. So does the program make sense? I would say yes. There's been a lot of confusion and uncertainty with the EB5 Regional Center program. There was a lapse there for briefly, and then there was changes in the investment amount. It had risen from 500,000 minimum investment to 900,000, and then that decision was vacated and it went back down to 500,000. So there was a lot of confusion, but we finally have legislation and we have clear rules. We know what the investment amount is. which is $800,000 minimum investment if the investment is located in what we call a high unemployment area, and $1,050,000 if the investment is not located in a high unemployment area. And you know, it's a great program because there is no language requirement, there's no education requirement. You're simply making an investment as a passive investor, especially in the regional center program. You don't have to be involved in managing that investment. The investment can be located anywhere and you can live anywhere. So there's a lot of flexibility with the program.
What are some of the major impacts of the new Reform and Integrity Act?
So the major impacts are the Integrity Act is really geared to protect investors. They want to bring more transparency to the program. They are putting a lot of responsibility on the shoulders of the regional centers. Sometimes the regional centers can be very sort of passive entities when they're sponsoring a project, but now they are required to certify that they've done an independent investigation of the project. They have to certify on an annual basis that the investment sponsor, they followed all securities laws and all the risks were properly disclosed, and all the compensation paid to agents has been properly disclosed. So, so that's one aspect, is just ensuring that U.S. securities laws are followed. And I would say, as far as investors are concerned, the biggest impact is, one is there are some categories of investments that will give you priority processing. For example, if you invest in a project that's located in a rural area, then investors can get priority processing. They'll get processed faster. And also there is a visa set aside for them. 20% of the visas annually have been set aside for rural investments. So countries like China or Vietnam that may be backlogged, they will have an immediate visa availability from a rural investment. So, and then also high unemployment areas also have a set aside of visas as well. So that's one thing I would say for investors. If they invest in certain locations, there are benefits. There are some preferences being given to those locations. And the other thing is how long you have to stay invested for. The new rules say that you only have to keep your money invested for 2 years after the filing of your I-526 petition. Now that's a big change, because it used to be very broad. It used to be you had to keep your money invested throughout your whole conditional residency period, which meant investors from China who were delayed, 10 years, let's say, getting in their approval, and then they moved to the US and their conditional residency period was another 2 years, they had to keep their money invested for this entire time. But that's no longer the case. Once you file your 526E petition, you only have to keep your money invested for 2 years. Now, the question is, how are the investments structured? They're mostly typically structured for 4 to 5 years, because it's not practical for people raising money through the program to bring this money, put this money to use and turn it around and have to repay it back, right? So there may be some industries that are conducive to paying it back earlier, but I think that is a big benefit, because it took away a lot of risk from investors having to keep their money invested for so long, and also and then some projects that had gotten their money repaid back had to put it into another project, which created a lot of uncertainty, because your money may have ended up in a totally different investment than where you originally invested. So I would say that's a great benefit for investors as well. And then, sorry. And
I just wanted to briefly go back to the processing times. You mentioned that you can speed up processing times if you opt for the rural development or a high unemployment area. Rupy, can you talk us through the processing times for a typical EB5 petition and one either through a rural investment or a high unemployment area?
just to clarify, there's not a faster processing time for high unemployment area. It's for a rural investments only. They're saying priority processing. Now, rules are very new, so we don't know what that means yet. We haven't
Has that
seen
been tested?
Sorry?
Has it been tested yet?
No, people are starting to file just now. So I think in the next 6 months, 8 months, we'll find out exactly what that means. But the rurals are being given priority, meaning they are going to be processed in a priority manner. I think most immigration lawyers I talk to say they expect that the priority processing should be less than a year. It should be that's kind of the guess. If the normal processing time is 3 to 4 years, priority processing should be less than a year. Now, recently USCIS also announced that they're adding a lot more staff. So generally, the processing times are expected to get shorter for the entire program. But all that remains to be tested.
Okay. So I'm sorry, carry on. I did interrupt you with that question.
No. So we were talking about the major impacts on investors. I would say another impact for investors is people who are already in the US on other visas, let's say H-1B or even a visitor visa. And if you decide to make an EB5 investment, you can do an adjustment of status concurrently, meaning you're in the US for another visa, you decide that you're going to make an EB5 investment. Now you get, as soon as you file, you get all the benefits of the EB5. So you can stay in the US, work in the US, so while you wait for your visa to be petition to be adjudicated. So that's a great benefit for investors.
All right, let's move on to a poll. I want to bring the audience a little bit and talk about immigration law and due diligence processes. So we're asking, a good immigration lawyer is sufficient to perform due diligence on an EB5 investment? Your thoughts, please, audience members. And once I close that, I'm going to be coming back to you, Rupy, and seeing what your thoughts are on this. You have a number of years of professional experience undertaking due diligence within the space of US immigration matters. So I think everyone's voted now. So I'm going to close this and I'm going to share the results on screen. Rupy, can you see the results?
Yes.
Okay, so there you go. 33%, pretty even Stevens, let's say. 33% yes, 33% no, and 30% only and on immigration matters, but not on financial matters. Rupy, your thoughts on that?
I would say C is correct. Immigration lawyers can definitely do an immigration due diligence. They can look at all the project documents and see if there's any risks in there from the 526 being denied. They can assess definitely the risk of an immigration benefit not being obtained. But all immigration lawyers will tell you that they're not investment advisors. They're not able to opine on the merits, financial risks of the investment, nor do they have the experience to do so. So I think that lawyers can definitely evaluate the risk of immigration, but not the financial risk.
So what should an investor do in this case then?
Some investors may be able to do the due diligence themselves. I think definitely due diligence is required in order. It's a large investment. The minimum amount is 800,000. I think you have to understand what you're investing into, and you have to understand all the risks. So, you know, whether get an advisor, whether you do it through an advisor, whether you do it yourself, I believe that due diligence is key in understanding basically what you are buying into.
All right. Well, look, moving on, but kind of sticking a little bit to the investment side and regional centers and the history that some regional centers may have. One of the questions that has come in through this webinar is, how much does a regional center's history matter when selecting an investment? What would be your thoughts on that, Rupy?
I would say it matters, but it's not. It should never be the primary driving factor, because I find that unfortunately that a lot of people gravitate towards a regional center because they're publicizing they've had hundreds or thousands of approvals. You know, it's always nice to know that somebody's been in the industry for a long time and they've had success with the approvals on the petitions. But I think you need to really evaluate the merits of each deal. If you think about getting a 526 petition approval, in my opinion, the bar is pretty low. So for example, if Bruno, you decided today that you have this great investment opportunity and it meets all the criteria of the EB5 program, and you hire a professional team, let's say just like Dan Lundy and his team, to put the whole package together, right? So there's no reason that that project should get denied. So it's a matter of who the team is behind, who's preparing all the business plan, the economic analysis, the offering memorandum, that it meets all the requirements of the program, then the risk is quite low on getting 526 denial. Most people that get denied based on their own personal source of funds issues. I said that, you know, not necessarily project-related issues. So I would say, you know, don't be hyper-focused on a number because someone's had a lot of approvals. Actually, you know, every investment that they sponsor is different. I have seen very reputable regional centers have a wide variety of investments out there, some stronger than others, and some, you know, some have even had failures. I'm so sorry, there's a phone ringing in my background.
It could be Dan Lundy. So we've momentarily lost Rupy, and I want to get back to her on the question of, you know, regional centers history, but also we're going to be talking about what industries are the safest for EB5 investments. So if you have any questions,
sorry about that. Turn off your phone before you get on it.
And comment. No problem. Welcome back, Rupy. I was just telling the audience that I want to look at what potentially, in your assessment, are the industries that represent the safest investments for EB5 clients at the moment. So let's look at, you know, a little bit historically and what's happening right now. What are the industries that are the safest for EB5 investments?
So, you know, I guess we have to look at where we are in general macroeconomic conditions. I mean, historically, this has been our real estate financing program. EB5 is generally, for many reasons, because it's easy to create jobs with construction. And most of the people that I would say have been sponsoring projects for the EB5 program have real estate development experience. There's not a lot of other industries, I would say, in the US that are even aware of the EB5 program. It's actually, you know, if you talk to someone in a manufacturing sector or the energy sector, they've never heard of the EB5 program. So they don't know that it's actually available as an option. I think that's about to change with this big preference being given to rural projects. You know, you're not going to find commercial real estate luxury products, right? Real estate investments in rural areas. Rural areas are going to be more industrial projects, manufacturing, energy, green energy. So, you know, I think there is a real demand for these rural projects. I was just in Asia last week, and you know, most people want the priority processing. They want a rural project, and so I think we're in a transition period, I would say, from real estate dominating this program to other industries starting to slowly come in. I'm personally looking at some oil and gas deals and some biodiesel deals, you know, green energy deals, manufacturing deals. Yeah. So, sorry, hi, Ed.
Yeah, very good. Well, thank you, Rupy. I wanted to inform the audience. I've invited Ed Bashara, who's the a member of the IMC's advisory committee based in Florida, to step in with some comments, given that Dan Lundy from Klasko is still having some issues joining. Ed, you are an immigration attorney, originally from Australia, practicing professor of law in Florida. We know each other quite well. I've been to Florida. You've been many times to our conference. What, in your opinion, then, are the industries that are the safest for EB5 investments?
Run for many years. Am I muted?
No, we can hear you perfectly well now.
Okay, so basically, and I've known Rupy for many years, and both Rupy and Dan are excellent at what they do, and I thought, well, I'll help Dan out and you, Bruno, Rupy, just to say I can offer some comments. But I've been doing immigration now for 40 years and EB5 for 30 years. And some of the safest industries, as Rupy said, you know, it sometimes depends on the industry, but it also depends on how it's structured, right? And Rupy is very much involved in diligence. And I think that over the COVID period, you know, we saw some downturn in the projects that were involved with hotels, right? Because there weren't that much attendance. But then we saw other types of projects where we saw warehouses, we saw fulfillment centers, where basically the industry itself allowed the warehouses to succeed financially. You know, so we're seeing some different approaches. Some EB5 projects involve multifamily, townhomes. You know, you've also got some that involve restaurant chains, right? So again, I think that it really depends on the financial structure of the business, and it depends on the economy as well. I don't know if you, Rupy, if you want to follow up on that.
Right. So, see, Dan, so you're still talking about real estate.
Sorry?
So you're still talking about real estate, you know, hospitality and real estate.
No, so not always, Rupy, not always real estate. I'm saying that hotels, hospitality may be.
Right, what we're used to, right. So, so what I'm saying is that there's going to be a mind shift. Because I talk to a lot of immigration attorneys, like I know Ed for a long time, and I have a lot of colleagues, and I find that their mindset is still in that hospitality, real estate, restaurant, what they're used to seeing in the past. They're still feel comfortable talking about that. So I think there's going to be a mind shift to include a lot more industries.
Yeah, and Rupy, I think that, you know, Bruno, see, in the EB5 program, what's very attractive, as Rupy said about regional centers, is that you can have a structure where there could be multiple investors coming in, and some of the projects want, you know, not just one investor, but maybe 20, 50, 100 investors. And then we have to show how their EB5 investment money creates jobs. There's a nexus. And so, and as Rupy said, if we're talking about construction, and let's say hotels or any other type of construction, then the USCIS has allowed us to use those investment dollars to create jobs indirectly through mathematical formulas and calculations, right? So if we have a project now that doesn't involve construction, then we have to get with very good economists, very good business planners. And so basically to show how that if there's not much construction, depending on the new industries that Rupy and I are talking about, how many investors can we bring in to create the necessary jobs?
Right. So let's look at some new industries, or potentially new industries, and moving away from the the traditional construction, hospitality, restaurants trade that is very popular from EB5. I mean, from my experience and travels, I hear a lot of about chain restaurants and new hotel construction sites. What about green energy construction? Are we seeing that investors are specifically saying, hey, I want to invest, but I'm not interested in a hospitality business, but wind farms? What do you guys have on wind farms? Green energy. I want to use my investment towards making an impact on climate change. Are you seeing investors asking this, or is it pushed these new constructions away from the traditional areas are being pushed by the developers, and perhaps even the government is getting involved?
I think it's too early to know what investors desire. But I think the preference on rural, having a priority processing and the visa set aside, and I think that's going to drive also what's available for investors. And those are going to be more of the industrial energy manufacturing type of projects in rural areas. So I think investors will gravitate towards them. I think any story that's a good story about green energy, of course, it always makes you feel good to be investing in something that you believe in. So I think the investors will have more choices in the future.
And I think that Rupy and Bruno, infrastructure is another, as Rupy said before, a special category, which is a set aside for infrastructure. So I think that that could be a very popular industry. But when we look at EB5, we can look at almost any type of project, right? So it doesn't always have to involve hospitality or construction. It could be any business, but the nature of the developers or the operators, they may say, we want to set up this business, then it's up to our team of professionals to say, well, how many investors can you bring in based upon the structure of the business activity? So it can be any business activity, as long as it's, viable financially and viable from an immigration standpoint. So there might be some regional centers that will have projects where we say, for this particular project, we may need 5 investors. For phase 2, we need another 5 investors. So it depends on the business activity, right?
All right. So moving on, I want to bring in another poll for our audience. I want to look a little bit about commissions. And the question we're asking here is an agent, and I'm going to launch this right away, so you should be able to see that. An agent should disclose his or her commission to an EB5 investor. So for you, the audience, it's a yes or no answer. And then the third option is if the investor asks. And I want to come back to Rupy and Ed for both today's panelists to weigh in on their thoughts on this. So I'm happy with the level of responses. I'm going to share those results on the screen. And Rupy and Ed, can you see the answers?
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect. So 60%, 67% of today's broadcast attendees say yes. Nobody answered no, and 33% of the audience answered yes if the investor asks. Let's start with you, Edward.
Yes. Well, but basically, you know, as Rupy will explain also, Bruno, is that there is a new RIA law that came about in March of this year, 2022. And it does require a number of different types of forms to be filed with USCIS, especially by a regional centre. And, you know, when we look at these forms now, these are forms filed by the project, by the regional centre project, and they're 956. There's a 956H, 956I, and they really require the regional centre and the projects to disclose who are the promoters, who are the agents, what fees are paid to the agents, and there is a requirement that, of course, the investors are aware of the commissions paid to the promoters or the agents. You know, this is now by law, and I think that there will be severe repercussions if the regional centre and the projects don't disclose this. Rupy, you're in this field. What do you think? You know?
Yes, I mean, it's a requirement now. The investor needs to know who got paid as a result of their investment and how much they got paid. And it's supposed to be a clear disclosure.
Mm. And where do they get that information from? If I was an investor, where would I be able to obtain that information from? Is there a website? Is it on the USCIS? Is it disclosure through the Securities Exchange?
Is supposed to provide you with that disclosure.
Yeah, and I think that, Rupy, you know, now that the regional centres have to be aware that these forms have to be filed and they have to be accurate, even in the, you know, the 956 and the 956, well, the G is for the annual report, but even in the 956G reporting, I think that maybe, Rupy, that before the regional centre projects accept the investors, there may be a necessity to obtain from the agents a written disclosure and acknowledgement from the investor that they were paid a commission.
Yes, yeah, I mean, typically, you know, I've been working with Kurt. He's a registered representative, a broker dealer. Now, USC securities laws, I mean, require these disclosures have to be made. So I've seen this as a common practice even before this new legislation, that the investors get a disclosure form, basically where they're acknowledged that they understand that so-and-so was paid commission as a result of their investment.
Because, Bruno, see what happens, as Rupy will tell you, is that not only is the investor making the investment, and in this case, today it's 800,000 or $1,050,000, but on top of the investment, they're also part of the industry standards are making a administration fee payment to the regional centre or the project, and that could be what, Rupy, around about $70,000 extra now.
Right, the ranges, yeah, 70, 80, yeah.
Right, right. And from that 70,000, usually the practice of the regional centre and the projects is to pay the promoters or the agents their finder's fee out of that admin fee, usually, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, perfect. But I want to move on to one of the questions we've got, which is perfect for this discussion. I want to talk a little bit about EB5 applications and their denials. So one of the questions we had coming in is, I'm representing an investor who's asking me, will they get their money back if the EB5 application is denied? So I want to spend a bit of time on this, probably about 7-8 minutes, and it's the last subject I want to touch upon. And this time I'd like to start with you, Rupy. Typically, will an investor get his money back if the EB5 application is denied? Is it as straightforward as yes or no?
No, it depends on each project. It depends on what's being offered to you and contractually. Some projects will say yes, we will refund the money if you're denied, and then you have to see, okay, how are they going to have this money available, right? If they've already used the money in the project, is there any other guarantee available, or is there any other liquidity available for them to repay it, or someone else is guaranteeing it? So you kind of have to look into what they're promising to do and when, and you also have to look at the exclusions of that guarantee, right? Like it might be, okay, repay it if the project is denied, but if the petition is denied based on your own source of funds, that may not be a condition. So every project will handle it differently.
Edward, some comments and thoughts on that?
Yeah, Rupy is definitely correct. You know, so when an investor enters into making a commitment to the project, you know, they have to realize that there's a commitment based upon their immigration goals, and there's a separate path and a combined path based upon the fact that they are real investors in a project, right? And, you know, they have to use due diligence. So if we're looking at the anticipation of the investor of how long they are told and how long they have to, from an immigration standpoint, keep their money in the project, it's going to be at least 5 years, you know, from the time they file the petition to the time they get the approval of the conditional green card. Then at the end of the 2 years, they have to file another petition. So from a normal processing standpoint, from an immigration standpoint, that could be the length of time. But also the documents that they sign, the offering documents, as Rupy said, there could be different conditions upon when they can see a return of capital. And so it really depends on what they're signing, right, Rupy? It depends on, you know, the offering documents and what they sign. And even if the documents say, well, if your petition is denied, we can see a return of capital, but in the offering documents, it may state under what timelines can you see a return of capital. Even if your petition is denied, even if the regional center has issues, there is the timeline that they sign when they sign the subscription agreement and offering documents. Okay, they have to be very careful of what they're signing. Okay, and Rupy can come in and help them use due diligence for that, right?
Right, of course, because Rupy, you're doing due diligence on a day-to-day basis, and Edward, you're an immigration attorney based down in Florida. Edward, you came on a little bit late, and once again, thank you for stepping in.
It's Bruno, it's my pleasure. You know, I have the utmost admiration for Dan Lundy and Ron Klasko, and I've known Ron for 40 years, and Dan, we still.
I know, and I do too.
And I know Rupy and Kurt for many years. So thank you.
Okay. Well, you know, one of the things we were talking about before you came on was what industries are the safest for EB5 investments, and I wanted to, you know, to get your perspective on this, Edward, as well.
Yeah, you know, I think safest, you know, so again, safest from an immigration standpoint and safest from an investment standpoint, where there can be a return of capital. I think that,
things, right?
Again, you know, we can, as we know, as immigration attorneys, EB5 attorneys, we can offer immigration due diligence. And sometimes we may say to the potential investor, let's do a first step analysis. The first step analysis is by looking at different projects, or that could be part of our initial representation to represent them as EB5 investors. And then, of course, Rupy would come in and we would coordinate these efforts as a team to say, okay, which projects are going to be safe from an immigration standpoint? You know, what is the timeline? Are they going to be able to concurrently file, as Rupy said, when they're in the US as a non-immigrant, can they concurrently file? So from an immigration standpoint, we're looking at the project, we're looking at the history of basically the project documentation, business plan, economic report being approved by the regional center and its projects, right? I hope I'm answering your question, Bruno.
You are, absolutely.
So basically, it really then depends on the financial viability of the project when Rupy comes in, because even from a legal standpoint, it may look good, right? You know, the incorporation documents may look good. The business plan of what the project's going to do as far as a timeline for operations or construction, that may all look good. But even from a legal standpoint and from a business standpoint, we need to look behind the paper, right? The paper can show that this is a great project and everything's going to be okay, but sometimes we have to look behind, right, and have experts that from an attorney standpoint, maybe not an immigration attorney, but an attorney that's been involved in bankruptcies and being a trustee, etc. Looking at how businesses can hide, their liability, and then Rupy can be doing the financial aspects and due diligence of, in today's world, would this business stand a chance financially, right? So we have to look behind everything, Bruno, nowadays, especially because it's 800,000 or $1 million, right? As Rupy said, it's great that a regional center and its projects have had a history of success, but even though that's the case, and I think Rupy would agree, each project stands alone, right? Each project stands alone. We have to look at that particular project.
Yeah, very important to do that. We're running out of time, so I want to put some final thoughts. I want to actually obtain some final thoughts from Rupy and Edward. And this session has been about the US EB5 program. Does it make sense more than ever for families seeking permanent US residency? So some final thoughts from both of you, please. And Rupy, if I may ask you first.
Okay. I think as I said earlier, I think it's a great program, no language requirement. You can live wherever you want, no other education requirement. So it's a matter of making an investment, of course, and finding a suitable investment. And, and it's an investment that you have the right to get your money repaid back after two years of filing. So obviously that depends on the success of the business, but it's a matter of tying up $800,000 for a few years, and hopefully you can recoup it and also, get a green card.
Thank you. Edward, some final thoughts on this?
Yeah, final thoughts. Of course, we know that there's a regional center program for EB5 investors, but there's also a direct, one EB5 investor can directly invest in their own business. So, there's a choice to be made. I think that also one has to look at the cost of EB5. And when we look at alternative programs in getting residence in the US through investment, and that could be multinational corporation, you have a corporation, let's say in Switzerland or England, and then you want to set up a US subsidiary, and then that's an intra-company transfer, and then that could lead to a green card. But then the cost of hiring high-level managers in the US, operations, for a few years, that cost could be greater than the cost of an EB5 investment, especially in the regional center context, right? So you have to look at, that cost aspect as well. And then the time, there are other employment-based categories where you can say, I want to get a green card through a job offer, but if you're from certain countries, or if you are looking at a timeline, even if you don't have what we call retrogression, longer delays, because there's too many people from that country applying for the job, that may be a reason why some applicants for a job offer may jump from being a beneficiary of a job offer into EB5, because EB5 could be quicker, especially when we can do the concurrent filings in the US now. And then on the average, Rupy, I think that we know that USCIS is saying that it may take a few years before the 526 is going to be adjudicated. But we as attorneys now know that we can go ahead and file federal lawsuits after 24 months on the average, and ask the federal judge to tell immigration to make a decision in 60 days. So there are ways and means. EB5, in my opinion, is probably one of the best, if not the best way to obtain residency if the people can afford that investment.
All right. Thank you for those final words, Rupy and Edward. Do feel free, audience members, to reach out to Edward or Rupy directly through their LinkedIn. They're both on the platform and active. You can also reach out to Daniel Lundy, who unfortunately couldn't attend this session today. You can also find the entire broadcast on our YouTube channel. And whilst you are there, I just ask you to please do me a small but valuable favor by leaving us a rating and your comments. And this was the final streaming session of Crossing Borders for 2022. We will be back in late January next year. In the meantime, of course, we wish you your families and your colleagues happy holidays and a great start to the new year ahead. Thanks again, Rupy and Edward, for joining me today.
Thank you, Bruno.
Thank you, Rupy, Brendan. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed, for stepping in.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Introducing the Certification in Investment Migration from the Investment Migration Council, the first structured learning product of its kind globally, designed for you. Explore the bite-sized learning pathway of each module on our custom online platform. You can track your progress as you go and learn at a pace that suits you, with an estimated 5 hours of study time per module. The Certification in Investment Migration contributes to the development of professional competencies and standards for those new to or already working in the industry. So, what are you waiting for? Visit our website to start your learning journey today.